Hello and welcome to another chat about a topic in military history. I'm Justin, and joining me here today is Joe Foneseca. Joe is a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary, and he's currently studying the Boxer Uprising. So this is a follow-on to the short-form video that many of you have probably already watched. If you haven't watched it, I would recommend that you do so because, while we might be reiterating some of what we said on that, there's might be stuff that we leave out. So it'd be best to watch that first for some overall broad context, and then we can dive into this one. Anyway, with that out of the way, welcome, Joe.
Hi, it's good to be back.
Yeah. So now, as I mentioned at the end of the last video, this is kind of Joe Unleashed. So you're gonna basically, I'm the clueless one here. I'm gonna ask various questions, try and guide the discussion, and for the most part, it will be you telling us stuff. So actually, my first question is to do with what the Boxer Uprising is called specifically, because
Ooh.
commonly you will hear Boxer Rebellion,
Yeah,
but you specifically, and I like some of the sources you've cited too. It seems to be pretty normal for historians to steer clear of the rebellion label.
this is something that I'll never forget because this was my supervisor got me real bad for this in my MA because I was doing the traditional Boxer Rebellion because that's what all the contemporary sources said. But he asked me like, "Well, who are they rebelling against?" Well, they're rebelling against the foreigners who are in China. Well, that doesn't quite work, does it?
Yeah.
The problem is
I,
that we have Western sources who are talking about this from their perspective, and they see it as this is Chinese peasants who are attacking them, rebelling against them, and their rightful, internationally legal, air quotes, position in China, which of course doesn't
mhm.
reflect the reality at all.
Yeah, so that's very interesting uh, thing to think about because I picked up on it immediately. I'm quite sensitive to what things are called because I know also with it's a similar story with the Taiping Rebellion versus Taiping Civil War.
hmm
Rebellion has that negative connotation to it.
It's a very
Um,
delegitimizing term to give to a movement,
exactly.
isn't it? That's why
Yeah.
I like Boxer movement, but Boxer uprising is I think safer because initially you do have that Boxer versus Qing government conflict, but that only lasts a short while before the government wholly backs the Boxers in their war against the foreigners, and then it's not really a rebellion anymore, is it? So uprising kind of gets the whole connotation of a mass peasant directed movement without ascribing any sort of inherently negative or inferiority to the Boxers as a collective.
Yeah. Okay. So, is there any more context you want to add that leads up to the Boxer uprising? You allude to some of it in the short check, but I imagine there's a lot more going on there.
Yeah, that was something I struggled with how much to include in a very short chat because there's several good books about why the Boxers happened when they did and why they did. Joseph Esherick, the Origins of the Boxer Uprising, is the best. So if anyone wants to go and grab a book that'll give them, several hundred pages of detail, that's the good one to start with. But really, it comes down to it's not just angry Chinese upset that foreigners are in their country. There's a wide variety of societal and environmental factors that lead to this uprising occurring when and where it did. Now, I mentioned it's in Shandong, which is just southeast ish of Beijing, the capital. And in that region, especially in northwest Shandong, it's not a good place to stay. There's very little at least in the turn of the century, there's very little potential for proper growing. The soil isn't the best. And that meant even when you see both Chinese sources and Western sources talking about people living in northwest Shandong in decades prior, they're talking about people who are just barely scraping by. So when anything untoward happens, like, say, a couple of years of drought, which is what we see in 1898 and 1899, 1900, it means that the very tenuous societal control you have in the area is going to fall apart even faster. So, in the period we're talking about, especially 1898, you have a region that's kind of on the cusp already of being able to feed themselves, being unable to feed themselves, and a government that is not quite in a position it needs to be in to support that continued existence. So you have a general upswing towards banditry, which is just something that happens generally in 19th century China with lack of control from the government in certain periphery regions. And then you have the local people trying to oppose banditry. And that's a sticky subject in itself because a lot of people were part-time bandits, right? You're bandits in the off season, and then when it was harvest season, you went back home and you tried to farm. Yeah,
And then got mad at the bandits trying to
yeah,
bother you while you're farming.
and
Yeah.
it's exactly as complicated as it sounds. And also in the region, right? It's so a slight diversion. Decades and decades prior, it was a more central trade hub. There was the river or the canal that went north south that flowed through the area, and people could actually make decent money on the river. Sea travel and then eventually rail travel makes that not an issue anymore. So no one is really using the waterways that flow through northwest Shandong like they used to. So a lot of the well-to-do are leaving. Those who can are leaving, basically. Those who can't are trapped and forced to try and make a living.
Okay.
So you have a local government that isn't quite able to provide. You've got rough environmental contexts that mean sustenance is hard to keep going. And then you have drought that just throws everything over the edge. And on top of that, on top of all those things that are already enough to have people throw up their hands and say, we got to change this ourselves, you have Christian missionaries coming in and trying to upset the local customs, culture, and evil legal proceedings. And that's something that most accounts are hitting on, at least the early ones, right? The Chinese who joined Christianity and who sought support from Christian missionaries in the region often had those missionaries go to bat for them in legal issues. So local disputes over land, property, whatever, you had the church intervening with the local government to try and turn things their way. Now, sometimes that was legitimate, and people who were being ostracized for their choice of religion were then protected, but also you have a lot of people who are taking advantage of the fact that they can use the church to bully other locals to get what they want. And that's what a lot of people who had this anti-Western, anti-Christian sentiment in the area were really hitting on.
Okay, that's very interesting.
There's a lot intermingled in the creation of something so specific as the Boxers.
Mm-hmm. And in relation to the Boxers, I mean, you've already in the short chat you went over kind of how like difficult it is to like pin down numbers and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, is there like a certain point we can identify where the Qing starts to realize that maybe there's more going on than just banditry? Like,
oh, that's tricky because there are those in the Qing government in 1898 who are seeing this as something to be supported, who are seeing the fact that they center anti-Christianity in their teaching. And again, this is very specifically with the Northwest Shandong Boxers, who are different from those who would become the Southwest Shandong Boxers, who are slightly different from those who popped up in Shanxi and those who popped up in southern Chile. So it's very difficult to pinpoint these things because it's so disparate a movement. But yes, initially the Qing response was, this is just another bandit movement, this is another uprising, we got to quell it. But there were those who were in court saying, well, maybe not, because look at what they're saying, look at what they're, advocating for. And 1898, I think it is, you see some of the Boxers catching on to that, because you have the initial sort of back and forth clashes, and even that is a bit hazy because you have some accounts from Qing officers who are saying that their soldiers are shooting high because they don't want to hit the Boxers because they don't think they're actually enemies and stuff like that. But after a few fights, the Boxers start pushing forth that slogan of protect the Qing, expel the foreigner, trying to like actually project to the government that, hey, we're not here to stop you in particular anymore, we're here to get these guys out. And then those people who were saying the Boxers are someone we should be supporting in the government suddenly got a bit more credence because, well, they were right? Look at that. So they're actually a pro-Qing movement. And again, that's entirely fuzzy, and it seems to be opportunistic on the part of the Boxers that things work out better for them when they can say they are a pro-Qing militia that can wander into a barracks and say, feed us for a night, we're going to go and kill these Christians.
Are there any, by the way, are there any central figures in the Boxers? I'm not that I'm well read on this, but I've never seen any names really for, like, it's just kind of the Boxers
Yeah.
versus, and then it lists all of these Western names or whatever, but
And that's
is it just because we don't know, or?
basically there are some. I mean, you have Shang Disheng, and I must apologize fervently for my inability to properly pronounce Chinese even after all these years. I try.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a losing battle for me too.
yeah, he was one of the main ones. He claimed he had magical powers. There's Cao Fuxian, who actually met with Empress Dowager Cixi, and he fought against he fought against the Qing initially, but then when that kind of shift happened towards support the Qing, expel the barbarians, he was kind of the front line of that. He too claimed mystical powers, and this just talks about historiography and what we find interesting as people who are looking at history. Lin Hier, she's always popping up because she was a acrobat prostitute leader of the female division of the Boxers.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, people always love a crazy story like that, right? Ooh,
Yeah,
wow, this
yeah.
crazy acrobat prostitute woman leading soldiers. What's going on? But most of the people we do hear about are the ones who are in the Manchu political sphere or the Manchu military,
Mhm.
because they're the ones who are directing soldiers that are fighting the Westerners, so the Westerners are commenting on them.
Okay.
But yeah, there's many more Boxer leaders because there are so many small groups, and I just unfortunately don't have them all and don't have them memorized because my research takes me more into the actual Qing Western war. But they are there, and if people want to go looking for them, there's plenty of stories. It's just since the scholarship isn't quite as robust on them, it's hard to differentiate a lot of what happened with the myth making that occurred in China after the uprising.
And is the lack of is the problem with sources like that they didn't write enough material down, or is it just a language barrier thing?
Yeah, most Boxers were peasants and poor
Hmm.
peasants,
Yeah.
and they didn't write stuff down.
Okay.
You have this popped up with some Red Lanterns, who I want to talk about later. They're the female counterpart to the Boxers, where you just have oral traditions coming down. So I've found some like stuff recorded in the 1950s where old men are reminiscing about these female boxers who could fly and turn guns to ash and set fire to Christian houses with a prayer and stuff like that. So a lot of the local peasant boxer tradition is oral and very mythological, and that fits into how the boxers kind of organize themselves and how they saw the world when they were going out to this rebellion, this uprising, right?
Okay. Are there any like huge major myths around the boxers? I mean, I'm sure there are because there's kind of a stereotype, and then given that a lot of the literature is going to be from the perspective of the West, just putting down this quote unquote rebellion.
Mm.
Um, so I assume there's a lot of myth making around them, and probably some that also stems from themselves. I wonder if you could clear some of that up, maybe lay
Yeah.
some of it out.
So this is it's we can put this into two major sections, I suppose. First, the mythology was a major part of who the boxers saw themselves as, and that will feed into how the Westerners saw the boxers, right? So a big portion of the boxers was not just the fact that they're organized as a communal militia to fight against bandits, and then of course into the anti-China, anti-Christian stuff, but also this goes back to a lot of spiritual traditions. So they're not just practicing martial arts; they're practicing very spiritualized martial arts, which involves um, spirit possession primarily, which is the idea that if you work really hard and fight really hard and get into this zone, you can channel the spirit of an ancient warrior into your body to a make you invulnerable and b give you the ability to fight much better to defeat the bandits or repel the invaders. And that is a fascinating part of this that goes way back into how Shandong area and northwest China as a whole kind of the local religion that is separate from anything official, but like you have an almost Robin Hood esque quality that they seem to be advocating for. That we're going to be the bandits that go out and get the bandits and save the people, and that's neat. But that also works into how they fought as a group, which then feeds into how Westerners and foreigners writing about the Boxers kind of misrepresent them. So at the heart of that spear position is invulnerability. The idea that if you're strong-willed enough and you're shot, you won't die. The bullet will miss you, or the bullet will disintegrate before it gets you. So some early encounters between Western trained forces and the Boxers, a good example is during Admiral Seymour's expedition, where you have Boxers advancing slowly towards lines of European troops as they're preparing to fight, thinking that as long as they maintain their ritual, maintain their chanting, their singing, their focus, that they can't be shot. And then they're shot. So yes, and that's also a separate fun thing where you get some Boxers, some Europeans talking to Chinese and saying, well, look, we shot them. They're dead. Clearly, they're not spear possessed. And they say, oh, no, they just were weak-willed. They weren't doing it right. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy there that, you're not going to win them over. But that's, in every encounter, that's short-lived. So with the Seymour expedition example, they did that the first time. They came on slowly, chanting, and were shot down. The second time, they were hiding in the tall grass, waiting, and as soon as they were within a few hundred feet, they got up and charged to try and get them before the Europeans were able to organize. So they learned. And that's something that David Silby does in his book. He's got a monograph about the Boxer War, the fighting, and I really appreciate that he tries to educate and say the Boxers weren't these savage fanatics that they're made out to be, right? They're not just people who dance around with martial arts and spear possession and then charge you and get shot by Europeans. They actually did form coherent fighting units that tried to use the advantages they had to win the battles they had. So an example he puts on from early 1900, Boxers make themselves known in this region to try and lure out some Qing soldiers, and then they're hiding in the rice paddies. And once the Qing soldiers are forced to walk along the narrow pathways between the rice paddies, they all jumped up, ambushed them, and specifically tried to kill the leadership. Like, that doesn't sound like a crazed, maniacal band of people shouting and chanting, right? They're trying to, behead the snake in that region and gain some power. And they do this to the British too later on, where they wait for a patrol to leave, wait for the patrol to get far enough away that they think they can take the patrol without getting reinforced, and then they attack. And unfortunately, they misjudged it because there was other British in the area that came to the rescue. But this is not, again, just 1960s movie-like crazy hordes of barbarians swarming you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting.
And it comes up again and again.
Yeah. So you've kind of mentioned, or we've talked around it, this that the Boxer Uprising there's an initial period of kind of Chinese versus Chinese fighting. So it wasn't just the Europeans show up. There was kind of this preamble, and I'm wondering if you can dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Henrietta Harrison and R.G. Tiedemann, they've got excellent articles on the sort of, initial phase of the Boxer Uprising where you have Boxer bands fighting other Chinese, both Qing and other villages, and their conclusions are really fascinating. So Henrietta Harrison specifically is trying to talk about the local concerns of the Boxers, at least initially. So what she's saying is when the Boxer Uprising, when the Boxers as a movement get up and start acting and running through the countryside and targeting Christians, the bands are fulfilling very local needs. So she argues that in Shanxi, there are several battles over a village because that village controls dikes and that therefore controls the flow of water to different regions. So it's not that they're trying to kill, Chinese Christians. They want to control the dikes because control the dikes means control the water, it means power and sustainability. And that is interesting because it kind of sees this as divorced from an entirely, fervent anti-Western, anti-Christian movement and something more palpable and local, that people are going to fight for what they see as immediately helping their situation. She also talks about the fact that this is a inter-village conflict in its initial stages, not intra-village. So it's not Boxers show up, all the non-Christians in the village turn on the Christians and fight and kill the Christians. It's a Boxer band shows up, and that village, even if it's a mix of Christians and non-Christians, will defend themselves against the oncoming Boxer band.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because even though there's tension between Christians and non-Christians in a lot of places, this is still the village unit, and it's still under attack by an outside force, being this band of Boxers. And I found that to be very interesting because you think someone's hungry and joining this, hungry, young, uneducated, joining this movement because they want to be better, want to help themselves or help their families. And it's not about this amorphous removal of a foreign idea, although that's there. It's what are we going to do to better ourselves now? And on the other side, it's not we have to defend our Christian residents because that's what we do. It's these are our neighbors and we have to help them because they're these people are in here to destroy our village. Right? It's a lot more personal, I guess, at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important to know. But you also have some. There's always exceptions, especially with this such a wide movement where the Christians were forced to flee from certain villages. But the fact that it wasn't not so monolithic an idea, not so monolithic a conflict, is worth noting. Right? There's local considerations all up and down.
Did the Boxers have any kind of did they try to hold on to territory really, or did they just kind of roam around in bands or armies or whatever?
That's part of the decentralized nature. So some of them did,
Mm-hmm.
right? They would. I forget where. I'm sorry, I forget where. But there was a part where they kind of moved into a town, told the town's governor that like we're staying here now. You're going to feed us because we're an official militia of the Qing. And he's like, okay, I guess so. And they just kind of held up there for a while. They did occupy parts of Tientsin when the Europeans showed up. When the European army showed up, they occupied and held Tientsin with government forces for a while, and they did ensure the area between Tianjin and Beijing, that narrow, 200 kilometers of river and railway, was firmly, under their control when the war kicked off. But in the other areas, it was sometimes these smaller battles where you're trying to take a certain area to either destroy the church there, and then reclaim it for non-Christians, or as in the case of that the local dikes, to secure some sort of power. But often they just kept wandering because this is a period of drought and famine. You have a militia that just is going to go where it wants to go and do what it wants to do. Is usually going to a place, say, "Hey, there's Christians here, let's attack it," and then they would do that, or try and get them to give up the Christians. So you have both, and I hate that. I think that's my answer for almost everything you've always asked me. Is yeah, it's all the things, but it's such a like an amorphous living thing that I would feel remiss if I said, yeah, the Boxers did this, because some did and some didn't.
Mm-hmm. So I guess before we start getting into nitty gritty, I guess there's kind of three different military forces that are going to end up getting engaged during when the Europeans show up.
Mm.
So there's the Qing, like the regular government forces.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Boxers, and then there's the European forces. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, the European forces are going to have differences in between them, but we'll
Mm-hmm.
probably just blob them together for simplicity's sake, unless there's something that you identify as something critical to point out. But
No, just that we should probably establish now that European, Westerner, foreigner, that always includes the Japanese,
mm-hmm.
who are there, but act like this gets into what is race in 19th century, right? But in all the writing, the foreigners, the Europeans, they just included the Japanese because they were in that same situation. They were the,
Mm-hmm.
Air quotes, civilized people who were being attacked by Boxers. So when I say
Mm-hmm.
Europeans, that does include the Japanese.
Japan. Yeah. So I guess we'll start with the Boxers. So I really don't know anything about how their quote unquote military, if you could call it that, is structured. What kind of weapons are you thinking of. I mean, we don't need to go in extreme detail in every weapon, but
Hmm.
that handful of images I've seen of boxers, that it's very stereotypical, like dudes with big dows or swords, basically.
Hmm.
That kind of thing. Do they have a lot of firepower, like any artillery? How much? Do they make a lot of use of like rifles or anything like that?
So the primary way of boxer fighting is that close quarters, martial arts inspired. We're going to use weapons like hand to hand weapons to kill people. That's their deal, right? They're practicing martial arts and then using martial arts to get their way. That also is in part because of they don't have access to real weapons, right? They're local militias. They're bandits. They're not really producing weapons in any sort of scale, right? So there's oftentimes Europeans will talk about, oh, they came at us with farming implements or swords, spears, sometimes staffs, right? Um,
Hmm.
but you do have occasional references to those gongals, the big unwieldy like teamed Chinese rifles that are very old.
Oh, right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and those are popping up, but they're more of alluded to as a joke by the Europeans. They're like, oh, they came at us with these things, right? They make an ungodly noise, but they don't really do much because they're unfortunately old and inaccurate weapons. As the war progresses, and as boxers start regularly fighting alongside um, Qing forces, they are armed, usually with inferior weapons to what the Qing soldiers are armed, but they're given rifles, they're given guns. And again, it's more of a case of when the war becomes a real thing and the boxers are fighting battles, they realize quite quickly that, okay, we can't do this the traditional way. We can't do this the way we were doing it. Rifles are better. Rifles win. So they try and acquire them where they can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so it's a similar mythos to um I guess like what would have been created by the Last Samurai,
oh, right.
or the Satsuma Rebellion, where it's like, oh, we're gonna stick to our swords or whatever, but then I mean, it's exceptionally loosely based on the Satsuma Rebellion, where
Hmm.
of course they weren't just using swords,
Yes.
because they're trying to actually win.
Yes. That's probably the greatest
um,
damage the last samurai's ever done is like make people think that samurai didn't use guns. Of course they use guns. Guns are effective. They use guns in the 1600s. They're going to use guns in the 1900s. 1800s, sorry. Yes.
um,
Yes.
okay, so moving on, I guess, to the Qing military. Is there anything you'd like to expand on there? I really don't know, like, other than some vague knowledge of the Qing at this point in the late 19th century, early 20th century. They're trying to modernize the
Hmm.
military a bit. And how's that going? I'm assuming there's probably like a core of pretty reasonably well equipped units, and
Yeah.
then a lot of really bad units as well, I imagine.
So the Qing army at this time is still split. So you still have the traditional banners. The idea that you have like Qing staffed and um, soldiers armies that are under these banners that are made up of very traditional Chinese organizations, where you have like the Tiger Men who are going to use shields and swords and get up close, and you have people archers, you have spearmen, and you have small, um, like rifle armed. Maybe rifles is not the right word. Musket, fire gunpowder armed troops and cavalry, but those aren't what they're using to fight this Boxer War. Those are there still, and you still have the green banners who are um, ethnically Chinese who aren't given the same equipment, aren't given the same prestige, but are still meant to fight. The ones who are actually fighting in this war are the modern trained Wu Wei Corps, who are the ones that were built up after the Sino-Japanese War in 1894-95 to be a modern army. So they're given European training, they're given European guns, and they're actually really good. And that's another myth of this Boxer War that the Chinese are a rabble, right? Yeah, they still had those banner armies, but it's not like the Qing was like, right, these Europeans are here, send out the guys with tiger skins on their backs and sword and shields. No, they had properly trained troops with Mauser rifles and accurate artillery, and they used them to a great effect. And that's something else that we need to clear up. And I'm so glad that David Stowe put that book out that actually talks about the organization of the Qing and the organization of the Boxers, that they're not just a savage horde. People If you ever watch that movie 55 Days in Peking, that's like the big thing, right? It's just masses of Chinese shouting "Sha Sha" and charging at barricades while stalwart Europeans gun them down. But that's not really what happened. So yeah, the army that opposed them was a properly organized, properly disciplined, and by most accounts, really good at their job, Western trained army.
Oh, okay, that's very fascinating. Do you have a rough number for this core of modern troops?
So the ones that were engaged, there's only 2 or 3 divisions. One of the corps was made up of people from Western China, the Kansu
Oh,
Braves, and they were
mhm.
still trained in the modern sense, but they played up that we're Muslims from the West and we're brave and tenacious warriors. So they were the ones who were, or they were one of the groups that were in Beijing attacking the legation quarters. So people like to talk about the scary Kansu Braves, but they were very good at their job too. So
Hmm.
right, I think only 3 of the 5 divisions actually fought in this war against the other ones. Yuan Shikai, who, if anyone knows about modern
Oh,
Chinese history, he had his own division, and he was very keen about keeping them far away from the fighting.
wow, I'm shocked.
Yeah, he actually used them to put down Boxers in the area. He got the order to bring up his army or bring up his corps to help, and he just kind of didn't get that one.
Yeah, he's that's extra amusing for people that are more familiar with Chinese history. Like he's interesting.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh, there we go. Around 90,000.
okay.
Yeah, the
Wow, they had big
entire
divisions then.
the entire
Oh, the
Yunnan
entire.
Corps
Okay,
is
yeah.
90,000, split up
Mhm.
into the 5: front,
Okay.
rear, left, right, center.
Okay.
Yeah, so only 3 of those actually fought: the center, rear, and front. Yes, I do have
Okay.
my notes.
All right.
And they put up a good fight. Like, we're going to talk about the actual war soon, and we'll see that they're not a pushover. And the fact that they're called a pushover is a massive disservice.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess to round this off, so the quote unquote Europeans plus honorary Japanese,
And American. Sorry, I left them out
and
last time.
Americans. Oh my God,
Foreigners. They're
yeah,
foreign.
foreigners. Um, so what does their force look like? And I and not only just in terms of tactics and equipment, which is probably the best known, I guess, of these three,
Mm.
but I mean, this is a multinational alliance, and I'm gonna hazard a guess that there was probably difficulties with coordination, or am I totally wrong there?
There was, but probably not the way you're thinking. On land, the biggest lack of coordination was the literal competition between these different, military force on the ground to be the ones to carry the day. And I think that's just the most 19th century thing we could talk about here. Is that these, like, oh, we got to go rescue the trapped diplomats, but I'm going to do it first. Um, so right, let's tackle this from the beginning. This is a very ad hoc, slapped together, army. I wouldn't even know if you want to call it that because of how just mismatched everything was. One of the, I guess, important piece of information to know why it's so put together, so slapped together, so messed up, is that the diplomats in Peking were kind of downplaying the Boxers as a threat until like the last second, literally. Like Sir Claude MacDonald, who is, great man, great soldier diplomat, kind of helped carry the day to keep people alive in Peking. He was constantly saying that, oh yeah, one good rainfall and all these Boxers will just disappear. And of course, that wasn't going to happen because there's kind of tens of thousands of armed militia running up and down the countryside, gunning for you and your people. One rainfall isn't going to put the rabble back in place. But he was also kind of a racist and didn't think much of the Chinese, so that came back to bite him. But that meant
Hmm.
that, by May 1900, there's like Boxers on the doorstep, and the Europeans aren't really in a place to do anything, or the foreigners, the collective, aren't in a place to do anything. Like, it's May 30th when you see this first batch of Marines, because you have some um, European, Japanese, American ships kind of running up and down China because there's so many different trading areas and port towns that are occupied by Europeans for trade purposes. So you have these squadrons of vessels who are going up to the area because there's, uprising, there's tension. And it's the Marines from those ships who are the first like line here. So, I mean, that's what you got. You have Marines from ships who are going off to Peking to, bolster the garrison, but they're just bringing what they have. So I think the Americans managed to bring a machine gun. The Russian had some artillery. Russian Marines had a couple pieces of artillery, but they left that behind. So that'll come in the second wave, and they just brought the artillery, like the ammunition. Sorry. So when the siege picks up, the Russians are sitting here with a bunch of, rounds, but no cannons to stuff them in, and they're not using the best gear. But then once the alarm is sounded and people start freaking out at home in the various countries saying, "Oh, we got to do something about this. This is a real deal." Like June 14th, you lose contact with Peking, and the siege is closing in, and everyone's like, "Oh, wow, this is real, right?" You got to scramble. The British sent some forces from Hong Kong north, the garrison forces there, and they have their Chinese division that they're training nearby, and they send them to North China, but they're going to take a while to get there. But can you think of something that's happening in the British Empire in 1900 that might be siphoning military resources?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. The Second Anglo-Boer War is kind of a big deal at the time, and that's where most of Britain's military forces are concentrated. So when they're hearing this talk about uprisings in China, they're like, "Oh, well, what are we going to do? We can't send everything. We kind of got occupied." So you get one quick expeditionary force from India slapped together and sent off with whatever they had access to at the time. The Russians are sending troops from Siberia, from Vladivostok, just get over there, get into Manchuria, get down into the Peking area and help out. French are sending colonial troops from French Indochina, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos area, over to do that. The Americans, where are the Americans in 1900? The Philippines, suppressing Filipino insurgents. So they're sending troops from the Philippines, the few they can spare, over to China as well. It's just an absolute mess. The big one, of course, is Japan. They're sitting right there. They've got thousands of soldiers, but this is still 19th century politics, and the British, the Russians, the French, the Japanese, and the Germans are all eyeing each other suspiciously, and the Japanese are unwilling to stick their neck out by sending a large force when there is such tension with Russia that Russia could claim, "Oh, look, this is Japan trying to invade China," or Russia would say, "Well, if they're sending this many, we could send this many." So there's a whole lot of back home stuff and international global stuff that's happening that makes this army that actually arrives in June, late June, to be just this absolute mess. But in some cases, in most cases, they are armed with relatively modern equipment, right? They've got smokeless powder and magazine-fed rifles. They've got some cannons, some machine guns. Some of these aren't very good. Some of them are kind of old and worn. And in a couple cases, I think at the Battle of Peking specifically, they note that the Chinese guns were better than theirs. Like their artillery was better. But there's enough to put up a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Fun to note, Churchill, not that Churchill, but a different Churchill who was a military attaché to the Japanese from Britain, noted in his diary that they sent the Japanese forces with last generation's rifles, which were still breech loading, big billowy smoke, black powder cartridges, because they thought, "Oh, this isn't a real war, so we can use it this old stock." And of course, that was awful when it came to actually fighting. The Chinese have magazine-fed rifles, and the Japanese are using these just awful, big, position-revealing black powder charges.
That's quite interesting. Do you have maybe some figures for the number of foreign troops? You can even break it down by nation if you want, although if you don't have it by nation, that's fine.
Okay, so the amount of people in Peking, so I do have these. What I'm staring at right now is the first expedition was 2,400-ish people.
Okay.
That was the Seymour expedition. I can't forget good old Seymour. He tried really hard. He's got about 2,500 people from all different nations. There's some Americans, British, French, Germans, Italians, a couple Austrians, Japanese, Russians. It's a tiny little thing. The expeditionary force, the second one, that when all these disparate little collections arrived from India, from Vietnam, from the Philippines, and then actually went and relieved Peking, that number's around 20,000,
Okay.
with the most being the Japanese and Russians, like by a wide margin. I think the Americans, British had 2,000 or so apiece. The other guys who were there were in the hundreds, and then the Japanese and the Russians did the most. I think 5,000-6,000 apiece more.
Okay.
But in Peking, you don't have very many at all. I was trying to pinpoint the actual number of Marines at Peking in like the hundreds of Marines. I think you had 400 ish men who were, because you only count the men who were there with rifles fighting, and that includes some civilians who were just trapped. Now, those are some interesting accounts if you ever want to read those. Anyone, the students, the scholars, the diplomats who were there in Peking who had to pick up rifles and try and defend themselves is a very interesting read. But that's a
Okay. Yeah.
definite aside. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. And you can totally correct me if I'm completely wrong, because of course my understanding is not the best. So there was and we're going to focus on the when the foreigners show up.
Mm.
So there's one expedition led by Seymour that fails,
Mm-hmm.
and then a second one that eventually relieves it.
Yes.
And there's also a siege going on the whole time in Beijing. Sorry.
Yeah.
You could tell I'm a mid 20th century historian.
Mm-hmm.
For those that aren't familiar, when the nationalists finally wrap things up, they move their capital to Nanjing, which is southern capital, and then they rename Beijing, which is normally that's northern capital. They changed the name to Beiping, which is pacified north. And then it of course gets changed back. But anyway, Beijing. So I guess would you prefer to maybe start with the siege in Beijing and then move on to the expeditions, or would you
Yeah, we can do
want
that.
to tackle it? Yeah,
Because
okay.
it's so hard because all these things are happening at the exact same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which makes it difficult to teach this stuff. But I do try and split it up between here's what's happening in Peking, here's what's happening with the first, and then the second expedition, and then the tumultuous occupation period afterwards. Because spoilers, the expedition succeeds, and China has to deal with that. First thing in the Siege of Peking, that's the famous one, right? That's what everyone loves to talk about. And at the time, like contemporarily, everyone was talking about that. That was the world's discussion point because you did have so many people from so many different places all trapped together in Peking in what is, at the time, such a classic civilization versus barbarism situation that people love, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though the British were dealing with the war in South Africa, the press was all about Peking and all about the people there, and that's the part that people go on and on about, right? If you look at anything contemporary today talking about the Boxer Uprising, it's all about the siege in Peking, Beijing, and that's tricky too. I never know whether people want to say
Peking or
Peking or Beijing
Beijing.
because
Yeah,
I try and go Beijing, but sometimes it slips out because literally everything contemporary is using Peking,
is
of course.
Peking. Does as a random aside, do you know where that comes from? I've never looked it up.
Peking?
Like Peking. Yeah.
Oh, it's just the Wade Giles translation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought so.
Um,
Anyway.
another fun aside: the son of uh, Wade, no Giles, is fighting in Peking.
Oh wow! Well, there you go, bringing it back around.
Lancelot Giles is one of the student interpreters in Peking, and he has a wonderful diary about his experience. Yeah, there you go. You can't escape. The world's so connected, isn't it?
Yeah, here I thought I was going completely off the rails, but nope.
No. The son of Giles himself was right there with a rifle in hand, trying to survive. So,
Okay.
you have a very interesting situation in Peking with the kind of physical situation. So Peking has walls, right? And they're very large ancient walls. And you have this great wall that surrounds the Tartar city, which is the inner city, right? And then within that you have walls around the Forbidden City. But nestled into the corner, the southwestern corner of the Tartar wall, is the foreign quarter. That's the legation quarter where all these different national legations where diplomats are residing live. So they're close to the Forbidden Palace, but they're still off in their own section. And then you have the Chinese city, which is on the other side of the wall to the south and away. So the foreign quarter, the legations, are in this strange geographic position where on two sides, the south and east, you have these massive stone walls that if anyone is up on them can command a view over the entire legation quarter, right? So one of the first things that they try and do is take what few marines they have and plop some of them up on that big wall to the south to secure that against the Chinese taking it and taking over, or like taking commanding position over the entire area. And that's something else. A lot of people, when they're recording their experiences in the siege here, they're this is not a siege of like constant attacks. They're not constantly being swarmed by boxers and fighting them off day in, day out. That happens a lot, but mostly this is a siege of sniping. The Chinese were constantly getting up into neighboring areas and trying to shoot into the legation quarter area to just kill who they could. Because they didn't really know how many Marines were in there. They didn't know what the force composition was like. And unfortunately for the Chinese soldiers fighting, there was that pretty back and forth wobbling within the government about how far to take this, right? Do we actually try and wipe them out, or do we try and get them to leave? And that's really tricky. So,
Well, yeah, so that's kind of an interesting point because from the very little bit that I kind of remember from lectures, Dr. David Wright actually, I think he mentioned in one of his lectures that like at least certain Qing units, they were firing blanks out of their artillery, or they weren't necessarily trying really hard to overrun the legations.
yeah, I think if there had been 100% unity and 100% we're going to take these legations, they would have. I don't think there's any real contention that if they had wanted to and had convinced everybody involved that that's what they were going to do, it would have happened pretty quickly. But there was always that waffling, and the fact that some of the limited attacks that they did do were repelled quite handily, it made it difficult to kind of get that consensus. And you had different units. You had boxers there. You had the Kansu Braves. You had other people, other units, and that was all intermixed. So yeah, I have heard that some people weren't shooting correctly or they're firing high, but then you have these accounts of these just vicious snipers who are able to put shots consistently through loopholes, hitting 3 or 4 guys in a minute because someone would take up the position of the loophole, get hit, someone else take up the position, get hit. It's because it's a loophole, right? It's that's hard to shoot through.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so the actual, when the siege proper came down, that's mid-June, right? You have the June 11th, the Japanese chancellor is murdered trying to wait
And this is 1900, right?
Yes, sorry, June 11th,
Yeah, okay.
1900.
Yeah.
Most of the action is 1900. The year, yeah. So June 11th, the Japanese chancellor was killed. He was waiting for Seymour to arrive, who didn't, obviously, because he was having his own struggles. And then a couple days of, there's like boxers, the hundreds of boxers here. What are we supposed to do? The June 14th, there's a recorded attack where, several hundred boxers swarmed us and we drove them off. But that's really hard to confirm or deny, and it might just be a bit of exaggeration on the part of the defenders. But by the end of the month, it's pretty clear that there's no easy way to get out. That if they wanted, like, you can't just go for a walk down the street or something because there are boxers down around there, and they probably will kill you. Now that means Westerners are pouring into the legation district because at this point, Claude MacDonald realizes an issue and is trying to get all the British into the British legation, and all the other foreigners are following suit. But also, you have thousands of Chinese Christians who have been retreating to Beijing from the countryside, and they're showing up too because they want relief, they want succor because they're being attacked by the Boxers without any sort of recourse. So by June 19, June 20, when it gets really serious, you've got the several hundred foreigners and a couple thousand Chinese Christians all crammed in this very tiny corner of the area. And that makes it very difficult. And something I wish more people would talk about, but there was no consideration for the Christian Chinese for housing or food. There was, we feed the Europeans, and if you have extra to give to them, okay. And that meant by the end of
Oh,
it,
yeah.
hundreds were dead from starvation.
Hmm.
Now they risked it because to leave would be instantaneous death, but still, that's something that we kind of downplay when we talk about, oh, the successful liberation of Peking, right? There, hundreds of Chinese died uh, because of lack of resources and because of the inability by the Europeans to distribute those resources.
Okay.
So the big inciting incident, the popular one, June 19th, Emperor Sisi wants the Europeans to leave. She offers an ultimatum saying everyone has to leave Beijing. They would be escorted by Qing soldiers to Tientsin, and that would be that. But the Europeans aren't budging. That's because there's still a very clear memory for a lot of them of what happened during the Indian uprising, the Sepoy Mutiny of 1856 or 57, sorry, where the rebelling soldiers offered the same ultimatum, saying, "We'll escort you out of the city and take it," and then they massacred them. So the British are saying, "No, we can't go. We can't trust the Chinese because of what happened in India 50 years ago." And it's hard to say whether or not what would have happened.
Yeah.
I don't think Shishi would have slaughtered them, but there are some people in the government who definitely wanted to, and it might have been a sense of whoever was in charge at the time, but they didn't. And instead, the next day, the German diplomat Baron von Kettler decides to go himself to talk to Shishi, and I think we talked about this briefly in
I
the
think
short
very
one.
briefly, yeah.
Um, but he's intercepted and killed probably by Kansu Braves, and then that's when they know that this is not something they can walk out of. This is a proper siege. And a lot of people mourn von Kittler as this, the hero for going out alone and being killed. I don't know if you want to go that far, but he probably didn't deserve to be cut down to the street as an individual. So 21st, Sishi actually declares war against all the foreign powers because down the coast, when we talk about the invasion, that's they just secured the forts on the coast. The European Marines and Japanese American Marines, they all took the Tagu forts, the Dagu forts, sorry, Taku Dagu, the Dagu forts, and that was something that the Qing government couldn't come back from. That's sort of cemented all the fears that this was a real invasion by the Europeans, and that's when they declare war. So from then on, it's just a proper siege situation. You have the different Marines assigned to different parts of the perimeter. Sorry, you have different men who are skilled at different things helping out. Like you have there's a certain American missionary who is in charge of all the defensive fortification building because he's an engineer, stuff like that. Oh, and an important aside, just outside of the um, foreign quarter is a cathedral, and I forget the name of the cathedral, but that there was a European bishop who brought in thousands of Chinese to protect them in that cathedral, and they sent from the legations like 50 or so Marines to go help them, and they had their own siege. So the
Oh,
entire time this siege is happening in the foreign quarter, which is of course dozens of buildings and lots of space, there is a cathedral that is being besieged for the exact same time.
hmm.
And those 50, 60 Marines plus the hundreds of Chinese fight off the Boxers and the Imperial soldiers themselves alone without support for the entire period. I think almost every officer is killed in that fighting, but we can't ignore them. They're often ignored in favor of Peking, but that was happening at the exact same time, and it's just as um, valiant a story, right?
Hmm.
But I think the only other thing I really want to touch on is this: you have this crisis of leadership in Peking, and I don't think that's talked about very often, so I'm going to talk about it now. at first, at first they see who is the highest ranking military officer, regardless of country, and that falls on a Austrian admiral, vice admiral, I think, who
Oh.
is there on vacation. And unfortunately, his name is escaping me again, but he is put in charge, and he immediately blunders it.
Oh.
There's an attack on the periphery, on one periphery, and he thinks it's this major invasion, so he like signals a full retreat because the British legation was the last ditch. So he signals his full retreat, and all the Marines leave their posts and run back to the British legations. And then Claude MacDonald's there, and he's like, "What's going on? Why is everyone swarming the British legation? What's happening?" Um, and then he corrects the situation. He figures out that it was a mistake. He sends everyone back to their positions, and the poor Austrian is very uh, humiliated by that. Luckily, the Chinese didn't expect them to retreat wholesale from this nothing attack, so they didn't actually capitalize on it. But yeah, from that moment on, Claude MacDonald takes charge. The British diplomat. He was a career soldier, but he's the diplomat now, and the poor Austrian admiral is kind of relegated off to the side and wallows in a bit of um, humiliated self pity, and tragically, he commits suicide via exposing himself in fighting to try and salvage his honor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's too bad because he didn't. He was there on vacation. He didn't need this.
Yeah.
But yeah, Claude MacDonald takes over and tries to organize a response team that's going to be at the British legation to go wherever they're needed. Um, an important part of my research is you have this section called the Fu by the Europeans. It's just the palace. It's a big palace with lots of pagodas, different buildings that the Japanese take over as their like defensive position, and it's the Japanese and some Christian converts that they train, and that's where a lot of the fighting happens. I
Oh,
read one
interesting.
account that gives the Japanese 102% casualty ratio because every single person was wounded at least once and went back and wounded again.
Wow.
And they also held for some of the longest time without being relieved. Claude MacDonald in his diary talks about like mid-July that the Japanese commander comes to him and says, "Hey, can I swap out my soldiers with some of the relief soldiers for a bit because they haven't had a break in 2 weeks?" And
Oh.
they're like, "Yeah, they actually haven't left their foxholes, their positions for weeks."
Wow.
So that's a very important fight going on. And then on the wall, you have Americans, this grain wall, and to the south, right? Americans and Germans who are fighting against constantly encroaching Boxers who are building up defenses on other parts of the walls and trying to come closer and closer and closer. And unfortunately, with most of these, grand epic battles, the leadership is slowly uh, incapacitated. So the American captains are wounded, the British captains are wounded, the French captains are like all the people who are in charge are slowly wounded, and it's just by the end of it, the Japanese commander is one of the few who's still like unscathed through the whole thing.
Oh. Hmm.
Colonel Shiba Goro, I can't forget him, and yeah, I shouldn't do a disservice to these poor people. Captain Halliday of the British, he led a attack out to try and silence some Chinese guns that were targeting the buildings inside where the civilians were, and was immediately wounded, but still managed to single-handedly clear the opening and let his Marines out. So he was taken out pretty quickly, but he fought hard. And Captain Myers, the American, he led a charge with some Russian soldiers over along the large wall in the south, but took a spear wound in so doing. So they captured some guns, but he was taken out of the commission too. So you have this very rapidly dwindling command structure inside Peking. But luckily,
Okay.
like we were saying, the Chinese never really pushed too hard to actually make it a do or die situation. There were a couple times where it got rough, but not so bad.
Okay. So I guess that's a pretty good survey of the siege.
Yeah,
So now we can move to, I guess, the two expeditions. So the one that fails under Seymour, and the other one,
or Seymour.
um, which I guess ultimately succeeds.
Yeah, Thunder Gathering.
I guess we'll start with the one that doesn't work out first, since I think that's I guess chronologically it's the first one anyway. So
Yeah, so that's happening. Um, June 11th is when the Sugiyama the Japanese chancellor was murdered, right? The day before is when Seymour sets out because they're
Okay.
getting that call for more reinforcements. And it's such a curious episode because Seymour is a British naval officer, right? He gathers Marines from the several different countries who are there at Tientsin, and this is before even the Boxers take over Tientsin. This is before everything goes to crap, and he decides that they're going to just train from Tientsin to Peking, and they do so in such a way that doesn't prepare them for fighting. Like they just stick all their food in one train car. There's some squabbling between the different groups as to who's going to sit where. Like really, like the Americans want to be at the front car, and this kind of crap. And then they just go. They just ride the train towards Peking, and they even pass by um, a Chinese army encamped outside of Tianjin, who was at the time ordered to be peaceful to the Europeans, but on the way back will be out to get them because that's when the declaration of war happened, and they just kind of off they go. But one day they only get a few kilometers up river, or sorry, well they are going up river. The trains follow the river up to Peking to Peiho, but they only get a few kilometers before the tracks have been sabotaged. So they got to get out and fix it. And that's for the first time they're attacked. I think 12th, yeah, the 2 days. So they're trying to fix these tracks and go and fix these tracks and go. But the Boxers in the area are literally ripping up the tracks by hand, right? Because they want to. This is a symbol of Western imperialism. This is how Europeans get around. And side note, laying down a railway in this area put hundreds of thousands of porters out of work.
Oh.
That doesn't get much attention, but I think it should. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people who made their money off of transporting goods up and down this river, and now there's a railway, so they're not getting that work anymore, are they?
Yeah, I'd never think of that. Yeah.
Now that did the Europeans, did they? Or the
Yeah.
Qing, I don't think. But yeah, so they're ripping up these rail lines. So that means the engineers with the 2,000 strong contingent have to fix the track and relay track to get the train going forward. And the second day, that's when they get that first Boxer attack, the 12th of June, when they're marching slowly, they're chanting, which is good for the Europeans because they're not prepared to disembark and fight, right? They're not, equipped in the train ready for a battle. So they start disgorging from different train cars and forming up and trying to get their guns together, their like cannon and machine gun and all that, while the Boxers are slowly doing their thing. And because of that, they're able to put them down. The attack is stopped pretty sufficiently. Some make it close enough to make it a real fight with some like accounts of hand-to-hand combat. This is where you get some people saying that, oh, it takes 4 bullets to put down a boxer when he's in this full trance, right? This gives you some of the crazier stereotypes about boxers fighting, right? But yeah, they do stop them. And Seymour thinks, well, okay, we fought off that attack. And that's supposed to be hundreds of boxers attacked um, the train there. And I don't know, that was the Western assessment. People tend to overdo those numbers sometimes, don't they?
Mhm.
So they keep going, and their advance party, who's going up the rail line ahead of the train to make sure things are okay and to check on the quality of the track, are constantly being attacked, like pinpricked by boxers. You're not really taking many casualties because they're small enough battles, but it's enough to slow them down dramatically. Like they make almost no progress on the 12th, 13th. Um, do, 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 do. Yeah, and then this is the 13th where they have their second major attack, where the Boxers don't do the slow march. They've learned, right? So that one, some Italian sailors are killed because they're out and about in like an orchard, scrounging for apples and whatnot, and the Boxers are all laying low and simultaneously spring up and launch the attack, and they can't make it back to the train, so they're all cut down. And that was a lot more of a dangerous attack, but uh, Seymour thinks, okay, maybe we can keep going. Maybe we can keep doing this. It's not until continuous harassment for the next like 4 days where they're making no progress that Seymour thinks, okay, we gotta reassess. We're running out of supplies, we're making no progress, and we're encountering way more resistance than we thought we were going to. So he leaves a German in charge at the front and goes back on a train car a few kilometers to see what was happening at like the last major town they passed, and that poor German, Guido von Eustem, he's in charge of the forward position, and he gets attacked seriously, like
Oh.
major attack. He's only got 50 odd men, so he's fighting this crazy fighting retreat to try and get back to Seymour and the rest of them, saying that oh, there's no way we're going to move forward now. And the casualties starting to mount from the continuous attacks, the couple of major attacks, and poor Eustem's retreat there. So 19th, it's been 9 days in what was supposed to be a day's journey. And Seymour was like, okay, we got to go back. We can't keep doing this. They try going back, and the train has been ripped up behind them. So there's no train tracks in front or behind in
Oh no.
their track. So they do what any good army does, or any good sailor would do. And he panics, goes to the river, steals some ships, and tries to use the ships to transport food and wounded and kind of shuffle down the coast. Now, the Boxers are onto them, and they start shadowing them the entire time. So it's this unpleasant thing where they've had to steal these boats, and now they're trying to get down the river, but the boats are running aground constantly, and the majority of the force has to stay on land, and they're being attacked by Boxers here and there, and they're moving incredibly slowly. So it's this awful, awful retreat. But then, what happens on the 21st, a couple more days, the Cixi declares war on all the Europeans. And that army encamped near Tientsin suddenly has orders to put Seymour down. So it's going to get a lot worse. And you have some of Seymour's diaries, and he's pretty nonchalant about a lot of this. Like at this point, some regular Chinese cavalry start shadowing them to keep tabs on them while the army gets in position. And he keeps saying, oh, yeah, these cavalry keep following us, but then we shoot at them and they go away. So I guess we're scaring them off. Like, I know he's a naval officer, but come on, man. Like that's pretty basic stuff. Right. So they get to Peking, which will be the seat of a battle much later, and there's this Chinese army fortified and waiting for him, and it looks like the end because he's got nowhere to go. There's boxes behind him. There's this army in front of him. So what's he gonna do? Well, in the middle of the night, they try and sneak past. They just decamp and try and run for it, and they get the luckiest break ever. They stumble upon a arsenal, like a fort, that was super lightly manned, and they just take it. They just attack it right then and there. And the Chinese troops in this arsenal retreat, and then Seymour's troops occupy it, and then they pull everyone off the boats and pull everyone into the fort, and there you go. They've captured a fort outside of Tientsin, and they're stuck there. So they have to fight off a couple of attacks because the army was chasing them this whole time, and they try and attack the fort, and they lose, dozens more men to casualties defending this fort, and then discover that the fort has like days and days and days worth of rice just sitting there, as well as hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition. Like it's a fully stocked arsenal that they just
Oh.
stumbled upon.
Do we know why it was so lightly manned to begin with?
I'm assuming because most of them were out in the field force to get the army, get to see.
Oh, yeah.
And
Mhm.
these guys, they just fled. They shouldn't have. If they had held in the fort, they would have taken it. But the Seymour's troops were attacking from different positions, and they think the assumption was that they thought they were being surrounded, so they just bolted. And they shouldn't have done that because they probably could have held off Seymour's weak, hungry, and undermanned force. But yeah, they actually managed to hole up in the Shigu Arsenal, this fortress outside of Tianjin, and that's where their story ends. The 2-week attempt to relieve Peking is this mess of failed attacks, failed opportunities, and a misunderstanding of how to do this. And maybe he shouldn't have even left in the first place. People criticize him for that, but I guess they had no real understanding of how massive the opposition would be at that point.
Mhm. So now the legation in Beijing is under siege.
Mm-hmm.
The first relief force is now under siege,
Yep.
and now they both need to be rescued by presumably a second force, and this is the one that's going to do the job.
Yes. So outside of the Shigo Arsenal, which is under siege, you have the city of Tianjin, which is currently under siege. The Boxers had occupied Tianjin after all this happened. After Seymour had left, they occupied Tianjin. The parts of that Qing army occupied Tianjin, and Tianjin has its own foreign quarter off to the west. And they basically besieged the foreigners in that foreign quarter in Tianjin for a few weeks too. Not nearly as rough or as long as Peking or the cathedral in Peking, but Tianjin has its own siege. And um, guess who's there? Future President of the United States, Herbert Hoover, and his wife. Um, yeah, he actually participates a bit in the Second Relief by helping them navigate Tianjin's um, outskirts. And
Okay.
Lou Hoover, his wife, has this wonderfully ridiculous letter to her friend about what a rip roaring great adventure that was, and oh, you should have been here with the siege, guns, and the shooting and the killing, and it was a crazy fun time. And I just don't know what to think about that. Yeah. So when going back again in time, you have Seymour setting out, and then contact being lost. Right, June 14th, you have no more contact with Beijing. Then you have no more contact with Seymour, and then suddenly you have no contact with Tianjin, the city. So there's these ships with Marines sitting in the river, like in the mouth of the river at Dagu, which are these big, impressive Western constructed forts to protect the mouth of the river that leads up to Beijing, right? And these ships are suddenly sitting under their guns and have no contact with anybody and no idea what's going on. So Admiral Bruce, who's in charge of the British ships, is getting real nervous by the 15th because there's nothing happening and no contact, and this isn't good. So he tries to get all the different navies together, and the navies did work really well together. And that's something that we can't ignore, that the armies had very maybe aggressive competition. The navies were very concerted in their efforts to protect themselves and to do their job correctly. So you got to give them credit for that. All the different nations' navies come together and decide to declare an ultimatum to the forts that's surrounding them, saying, surrender the forts to us or we'll take them. Which is kind of rich coming from, a dozen boats, gunships, sitting in a river with the forts looking at them. But they do. That was on the 17th of June, after they've lost contact with everybody. The only one who abstains from this is the Americans, because they're under strict orders not to get involved with conflict, right? They're there to protect civilian life, and that's it. So they kind of skirt this battle. But on the 17th, 2 a.m., the ultimatum comes up. And of course, this is always the same thing where some people say the Chinese attacked first, some people say the Europeans shot first. But the shooting starts at 2 a.m., and the battle of Tagu's on. And that's a neat little one where they're kind of shooting blind in the middle of the night, trying to hit the forts enough to land Marines to then take the forts, but also trying not to expose themselves to gunfire from these forts, because this is what they're designed to do. Most of the big guns are facing out to sea, but there's still enough guns facing the river to be a problem. This has some interesting stuff where there was some Chinese gunboats in the river as well, and the British gunboats actually perform this crazy boarding action where they rush up alongside the Chinese ships and then drag these other boats full of troops up with them before the Chinese know what's going on, and then literally hop over and board and take the Chinese ships before any fighting happens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't expect that, but they pulled it off. Along the forts, it's a bit of a trickier thing because there's a Russian ship that tries to use a spotlight to, light up the guns, and it gets hit enough times to sink. The American ship gets hit, so it tries to run away. And then the mostly British and Japanese land, the others too, but the majority was British and Japanese, land men to try and actually take the fort from the land side. And that's a charge across an open field because it's a fortification, right? you're not going to let a forest and creep up on that or anything. So they get pushed back a couple times when the Chinese are fighting or firing so much that they can't take this fort until light. When light starts coming up, like 5, 6 a.m., then the ship guns are accurate enough to silence a lot of the Chinese guns, and the British and the Japanese are able to take the wall. But then you get one of these really neat stories that, this mythological stories where you have the British and the Japanese Marines racing each other to be first over the parapet. They want to raise their flag first. So you have like multiple accounts. One of them has the Japanese Marine captain reaching the top first, putting his hand back to grab the British captain's hand and drag him up, but is then shot and falls. But he was there first. But he also brought up his friend. So it's this weird post-event Anglo-Japanese relation, friendliness. This cooperation between the British and the Japanese that I part of my research is looking at that specific angle. But that's to prep the way for Anglo-Japanese relations, Anglo-Japanese alliance, and all that fun stuff. Mm-hmm. But so they take the forts, and that's when the Shishi and her government are like, well, this is bad. Like, foreign sailors have landed and taken our forts that defend our capital. This is war. So whether or not it's a good idea or not, they did it. They secure the access to the sea. They secure the immediate area around the Daegu forts, and then they got to figure out what they're going to do because they still don't know anything from Tientsin or Seymour or Peking, right? So then you get this weird ad hoc scramble to get to the foreign quarter in Tianjin. So you have this, like, there's a joint Russian-American attack that is totally halted and beaten back. And eventually you have enough people showing up. When is it by? I think it's the 23rd of June that you actually get foreign troops into the foreign quarter of Tianjin. And that's the first, hurdle. We have a connection now from Tianjin, foreign quarter, to the Daegu forts, to the sea and the world. But you still only have a few thousand men there, right? This is the remainder of the Marines that were there initially, and the troops that are trickling in from the Philippines, from Hong Kong, from Japan. It's nothing big yet. So this is the beginning of a couple week long, second siege of Tianjin, where you have Marines and troops funneling into Tianjin's foreign quarter to defend that from the Boxer and Qing held rest of the city. And there's a bunch of battles over that, which again don't get talked about because it's all about the siege in Peking. But those are some real fights. And that's a real sometimes very skin to their teeth. Like the Boxers attack the train station that's attached to the foreign quarter over and over again. And the Russians who are in charge of the train station barely hold on. They have to get other forces like the British and the Japanese up there to help them fend off these attacks. And there's constant skirmishing over the road from Tianjin back to the Daegu forts. It's a bit of a mess. Oh, right, I can't forget. They do send an expedition of 2,000 troops, Russians, mostly Cossacks, who track down and relieve Seymour. They find him.
Okay, yeah, they bring Seymour home. Was it led by Superintendent Chalmers?
Sure, let's say the Cossack was, Hetman Chalmers came and saved the day. Yeah, so that story ends okay for the poor Seymour people. And he's got to write his I screwed up story. Right, but I don't want to spend too much time on this. The next important thing is the actual battle for Tianjin, because this is the ones that the Allies could have lost, and they probably they were very close to losing. July 13th, July 14th, when the actual battle to take the rest of Tianjin happens. So that is weeks of battling over the periphery of the foreign quarter of Tianjin, and more soldiers showing up. Like the U.S. 9th Infantry showed up on July 10th. So it's very late trickling in of troops. But by the 13th, they think they have enough that are actually going to try and take Tianjin Walled City. And this is an absolute mess, as most things are in this war. So in the center of Tianjin is a great walled city, just like in Beijing. And that's the native city. And that's where the Boxers and the Qing forces are holed up. So the Europeans are saying, okay, we can do a two-pronged attack. We'll attack from the south, we'll attack from the east, and we'll push the wall, we'll blow open the gates, and we'll storm it, and we'll take it. And this is where they learn about the efficacy of Chinese fire, Chinese cannons, and the accuracy of Chinese rifles. Because they do not make it very far. There is a single raised highway going from the south up to the front gate of the native city, and that is an absolute killing field. So to get in the first wall, which is like a mud wall, the forces in the south have to kind of push through this tiny gate on this raised causeway that the Chinese have obviously ranged for, and they're just torn apart as they do it. So in the south, you have the British, the Americans, and the Japanese, and some French, all kind of simultaneously pushing to get through this tight space and into the other side so they can actually form up and try and do an attack, and they're being torn apart while they do it. When they get to the other side, turns out that not everyone got the right orders about where to go, so the Americans are kind of scrambling all over the different place, and there's swampland, like marsh, so it's impossible to move properly. So you have this British admiral Gasly trying to coordinate things, but he has no idea what's going on. He has no idea where everyone's supposed to be. The American 9th Infantry run off to the right because they're being shot at from the right, so they're just off to go and deal with that, but that doesn't work out. And you have British and American Marines skirmishing with Boxers in house-to-house fighting on the left. You have the Japanese pushing up the center to try and get to the gate and being shot down over and over again, but they don't stop because that's how the Japanese army works, right? They don't stop.
Yeah.
And the French are dawdling behind the wall, not even pushing up. It's an absolute mess.
Oh, man.
So this is where you get, I don't know how popular these things are now, but the keep up the fire, men, is a slogan of the 9th Infantry of the U.S. now, and this is where the captain here is shot and killed. And that's his dying words to his troops to keep the morale up, because they get pinned down because the Boxers here have guns, because the war started. They're with the Qing forces now, and they're entrenched behind a river, keeping the Americans pinned down in a graveyard, and they're in buildings. So the Americans are locked down. They can't do anything. And they're every time they try and move, they're getting shot down. So it's a total failed attack. The eastern attack is not as bloody, but still a failed attack too. They don't breach the wall. So it's the night of the 13th. They've been a whole day of basically pinned down or fighting house to house, trying to get close to this wall with no success. The Japanese have engineers who keep trying to rush the gate and set explosives to blow up the gate, and they can't do it. Every time they get close, they get shot down, or they try lighting the fuse, and the Chinese put out the fuse. They shoot the fuses until they're done. It's a mess. So night falls, and it looks like a total defeat. Except the Japanese are there, and the Japanese are the Japanese. So one very selfless engineer just grabs a bunch of explosives himself and charges the gate in the dark and blows himself up, but blows up the gate as well.
Oh,
yeah. So if it wasn't
just
for...
like Helm's Deep.
Yeah, sure.
Does that happen in the Two Towers? I haven't read the Two Towers in forever. I wonder if that would if he pulled that from. Although that'd be unlikely. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
It's very interesting because this is part of what the Japanese military tries to advocate for, right? This guy is the perfect example of what a Japanese soldier should be. Someone who's willing to throw their life away for the objective, and he did it. Not that, of course, everyone followed that, but that's the company line, right? So yeah, he does that. That blows up the gate, and the Japanese swarm it and take the gate in the middle of the night. In the morning, everyone else can follow into the native city, and they capture the town. But that was by a hair's breadth that they won that, right? It was very, very close to being a total collapse of the Allied army, and then who knows how long it would have taken to reorganize and feel strong enough to attack again. So what do the Europeans do? Well, they talk about how wonderful the design of the walls were, who were designed by Chinese Gordon, who led the ever victorious army and died in Khartoum a couple decades earlier, and they put it all on him. good job, Chinese Gordon. You built great walls.
Built great walls.
Yep.
Yeah.
So nothing about the wonderful execution of the defense by the Chinese, the Qing forces and the Boxers.
Hmm.
But yeah, another thing you need to try and undo, right?
Yeah, that's interesting because I mean, even in my area, it's kind of amusing sometimes seeing like you can practically see the smoke coming out of their ears trying to find a way to give all the credit to a European. Like when I look at like a Japanese aviation and all that, like they're like, "Oh, that's a Hamilton Standard license produced propeller." And it's like they completely ignore that the entire plane is indigenously Japanese and really good.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
And that comes up a lot, right? Where you just, how do we almost lost? That can't be. They're Chinese,
Yeah.
which is of course ridiculous. So at this point, they've taken the city, but that was a mauling, and they don't think they can push on to Peking. And by this point, they think, well, they must be dead by now. There's no way they can hold out this long. But at the beginning of August, a messenger actually makes it through from Beijing
Oh
all the
wow.
way to Tianjin. It's almost shot by Russians a couple times, but he makes it in, and was still alive. And that's when everyone scrambles. It was like, oh, wow, we got to go, because if they're still alive, we can save them. So the past, like, this is early August, they had a couple weeks of trying to get more and more troops into Tianjin. The rest of the Indian army arrives, more Americans arrive, more Japanese, more Russians arrive. So they decide to just go with what they have. It's the 4th of August, and they gotta go, right? So 3 a.m., 4th of August, this army that's some 20,000 strong, and most accounts say that they were thinking they needed 60,000. With how bad Tianjin was, they wanted 60,000 troops to push on to Peking, but they couldn't wait, so they just went with the 20,000 they had. And this is nice, because this is one of the real times where this is totally, well, mostly altruistic, right? They want to go rescue their countrymen, and
Hmm.
that's the riding decision-making factor here. If we have time, I don't know if we will have time to talk about the um, international diplomatic scene. There's a lot of discussion about prestige and who's going to do what's going to happen to China afterwards. But on the ground, right here, there's like, we gotta figure this out. We gotta go now. So unfortunately, there's a lot of ransacking of uh, local Chinese for wagons, for equipment, for food, and they march on. And there's a couple of not so much close calls, but there's a couple of major engagements between the 4th when they leave and the 14th when they actually relieve Peking. So the 5th, they get to Peking, nearby, which is where um, Seymour, sorry, where Seymour was holed up in the Jigo arsenal. And they find a multi-layered, entrenched position staffed by the remnants of that Chinese army and the Boxers that were at Tianjin. So when they left, they didn't just scatter; they retreated to Peking, and they set up a very deep defense, like multiple trench
Oh.
lines with artillery ranged properly to hit the Allies as they start moving. And as Davis Lee argues, a very coherent plan for what to happen when the Allies show up. So the Allies get there, and it's a bit of a mess. You've got the Peiho River, which is the big river going up down, and the Chinese position stretches for kilometers on either side of it. So you can't really outflank it because you're going to be going for way too far. So they decide they got to attack it, and they divide between the Japanese, British, and Americans on one bank of the river, and the French and Russians on the other bank. And they're going to try and uh, push all at the same time, rush the trenches, hopefully keep them all pinned down while the Japanese, who are still the biggest um, contingent, roll up one part of the flank there and push inwards towards the city of, or the town of Peking. So it's a pretty solid plan for the Allies, right?
Mhm.
The Chinese, though, had anticipated this, and on the Russian French side, they broke part of the dike of the river and flooded the area.
Oh.
So the Allies didn't have this intelligence, but when the attack starts and the French and Russian go, they're marching through a bog, and it's impossible. So they have no cover and they're unable to move correctly. with any sort of speed or anything, and they are being hammered by Chinese artillery and rifle fire, so they're just pinned down. The entire Franco-Russian section of the attack is just stalled completely. So I thought that was pretty good thinking.
Mhm.
On the other side, the Americans don't arrive in time to start because they're still trying to maneuver through. This is a midsummer. Crops are very high. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of accounts from British officers on horseback saying that they couldn't see troops on the ground because of the crops were so high. But then they themselves were on horseback, so their heads were sticking up over the crops. But that meant they were being targeted, so they just dismounted.
Yeah, I just have this image of like just uh officers, just heads just sticking up and bobbing
Basically,
around.
there was one who said he like poked his head up and to see where the Chinese position were, saw the Chinese position, and then had to duck back down because the Chinese position started firing on their on their location. So yeah, the this is one where the Japanese again take the day. The British are kind of slow. The British cavalry, the British Indian cavalry that was supposed to support them, actually just didn't. They didn't really act. So the Japanese, with their inferior rifles, just charged the Chinese position over and over again until they took it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so they did take it, but they took horrendous casualties, like
Hmm.
hundreds of casualties to take this town. And then when the Chinese realized that they're being overwhelmed by the Japanese flank, they managed to pull most of their guns to the other side of the river and then destroy the bridge and retreat.
Oh, so
So that,
that yeah, so there's no routes here. Like they withdraw from Tianjin and then prepare a defensive position, and then when they're outflanked, they withdraw again
yeah,
orderly.
yes.
Uh,
And that's again something else. These are not the crying savages that TV would like you to believe, right? This is an army, and it's a well
hmm.
trained army, a well led army, and they know what they're doing. The initial escape from Tianjin was a bit more of a route than
Oh,
this
okay.
was, but they did reorganize and come back
Hmm.
and form up at Beijing, or sorry, Peking, and then this was a proper one. So then there's one more engagement up the river, the last major one, Yangcheng or Huancheng, where the remnants of this army again try to hold off. The Americans and the British and the Russians mostly lead this one, and it's a bit of a quick fight. They overwhelm them very very quickly, and that's the last major engagement on the road. There's some fighting. There's always skirmishing with villages because every village they pass seems to have boxers,
Hmm.
and then that means every village they pass unfortunately suffers some form of destruction because they're fighting in these villages, and then they occupy these villages to and destroy them to make the inhospitable for boxers. So it's a bit of a bloody march. But also, this is middle of August in northern China, so it is hot, and you have dozens of casualties from the Allied army because of heat stroke.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
I
something
can
that
imagine that.
the American Marines were actually taken out of a battle. I think that was Yangsan, because they suffered such a high level of heat stroke that they were made combat ineffective.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty ridiculous, right?
Hmm.
Now, August 12th, getting to the end game now. They're very close to Beijing. Um, so close, in fact, that there's a council of war trying to figure out how we're going to approach Beijing because it's a big city. With how rough Tianjin was, how concentrated they were in Peking and Yangsong, how do we do this? And they decide they're going to, recon and force the first day, assign different gates of the outer walls to each faction or each contingent, attack the wall simultaneously, push in, and make their way to the foreign quarter, presuming everyone's still alive. If and if not, vengeance. That was the order, right?
Hmm.
They were going to do what they did in the '60s and do it again. Unfortunately, what actually happened is the Russians decided that that's all well and good, but they wanted to get there first. So in the middle of the night, the Russian contingent just ups and goes for Beijing. And then the Japanese wake up and realize that the Russians, are actually gone. Like they weren't just milling about; they actually got up and marched. So they shoot off for Peking, and then the British and Americans are like, "Oh, well, we got to go too." So they just order a general advance because if they don't, there's going to be who knows what kind of disorder, right? So then everyone is scrambling, like running to get to Beijing first, to be the first in there to liberate the locations, and that creates all kinds of chaos because, of course, it does.
Yeah.
So the Russians approach Beijing, uh, realize that their gate that they were assigned in the War Council is far northwest of the city. So if they were to go to that gate, they have to march northwest, break through that gate, then march south of the city. So like, oh, forget that. The American gate's right here. It's pretty close to the foreign legation. We'll hit that one. So the Russians attack the American gate and manage to break through the first gate, but then they get caught because the Chinese are actually putting up a decent fight on the walls. They get their guns stuck in the mud in the gatehouse area. Like they block the way. And then the Americans show up and see there's a bunch of Russians trying to break through their gate and blocking them from doing it. So there's all kinds of chaos there. And this is where you get the other American heroic moment of the Boxer War. They decide they're going to go over the wall. And they have this, there's a famous picture, and you have this bugler or drummer boy who volunteers to climb up the Tartar wall, this, massive stone wall without any weapons. And he does it, and some others follow. He gets Medal of Honor. They throw down a rope, and the Americans climb up the wall and then use their position on the wall to clear out the Chinese and rescue the Russians. So then you have these Russian-American mass moving towards the legation center. The Japanese do go to their gates, and the guns that they bring aren't strong enough to knock down the gate really quickly. So they have this prolonged engagement with the Chinese gate, which it takes almost all day to bat it down, and then they got to fight through the city from where they entered to the foreign legation. The British, they take their gate, which is in the south, in the Chinese city. I remember I said there was the Forbidden City with a wall, and the Tartar City with a wall, and then to the south there's the Chinese city. Mm-hmm. They go in the Chinese city, and there's almost no opposition there. They get in, and they're like, oh, well, we can just go north from here in the city to the Tartar wall and get to the legations that way. So they go that way, and they see some signals on the wall saying, like, yeah, we're still alive, come and get us. Go to the sewer gate. And if they went down, some officers and British Indian soldiers, and there's this great gate, because there's a canal that goes through the city, and they sawed through the gate on both sides, and the British Indian forces with some British officers were the first into the legation, and therefore won the game, I guess. But everyone who got there thought they were the first, which is kind of funny. So the British got in there and like, we did this. And then the Americans bust in like, yeah, oh. And the Russians got in, yeah, oh. But yeah, and then, it's kind of comical with how ridiculous an engagement that was. But that was still a pretty bloody fight. And it did lead to a pretty violent repression, I guess, of the Tartar city of China, where, the Chinese army starts fleeing. The imperial court flees because they're suddenly there's allied armies in Beijing, and then it's hard to tell a boxer from a civilian. At least that's what they say, right? So there's a lot of indiscriminate violence, unfortunately, at this stage. But they did it. They they rescue the expedition. The Chinese government flees, and the Allies are in charge of northern China, and that concludes the actual war of the Boxer War. And I'm sure we've gone on for far too long, but I'll just mention that after that, you do have a year plus of pretty violent, repressive, kind of proactive pushes into the countryside to deal with remaining Boxer strongholds. It can be a bit unsavory, given that most of those troops were arriving late. Because the Great Powers actually decided on the leader of the expedition the day they relieved Peking.
Oh.
So word came like, right, this German general, Waldersee? Yeah, he's going to be in charge of the relief of Peking expedition. And by the time that word got to China, they had relieved Peking. But he still came, and there was still military expeditions out into the countryside to deal with the Boxers. But yeah, that's the in one go short telling of the Boxer War.
All right. How does this all turn out?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the treaty signing is really interesting because you have all these different European powers who suddenly we saved the day, rescued the people. Okay, what now? We've got 8 different nations, armies in northern China looking at each other, and the government's not here. How is this going to go? You have this constant fear, especially on the part of the British, that this kerfuffle in the north is going to lead to the partition of China, and they don't want that. And a lot of people don't want that because they don't. For a European colonial mindset, a united China is a China that's exploitable economically. A shattered China is one you have to administer, and no one wants to do that. It's not profitable. So there's this dread of a second, scramble for Africa and a scramble for China that's going to happen if the Boxer Uprising leads to this destruction of China. So you have this debate, like, how do we get order again? Do we like leave Beijing and let the government come back and then talk to them? Do we keep troops here? Do we have to govern things? Like Tientsin is being governed by a coalition of allied officers right now, and they're governing it. They're redoing streets. They're setting up sewage systems. Like they're going all out, and it's they're not quite sure how we're gonna rebuild this China. The Russians want to leave. The Russians say, "Oh, we got to pull out of Beijing entirely," and they start doing that. But then the Japanese don't want to do that. The British don't quite want to do that, but they managed to pull back a little bit, calm things down, get the Chinese government talking again, and set up this initially very aggressively, like very punitive treaty, the Boxer Protocol, which gets gradually pulled back into something that could be beneficial. The important part of it is that there's a lot of money, like a lot of the indemnity that was going to be used to pay, reparations, pay for the military expenditures. The Americans and a lot of others started giving that back to China as education funds, which is interesting. So instead of paying the American government for the war, it was invest this money in universities. And that's nice, I guess, if you miss the entire part of this war being because of the overextension of European colonialism in China and the inability to rectify ecological, environmental, and social issues that are tearing the country apart. That it wasn't entirely bad. But when the Empress Dowager comes back, and they don't get rid of her or anything, they do make her execute a lot of the officials who were pro-Boxer, and a lot of the Boxer leaders are caught and killed, and that's all part of the bloody punitive campaigns. There's a pretty intense sea change towards, modernization, as in the acquisition of Western outside technology and customs to better China. That had been attempted before, but after the Boxer War and after the Boxer Protocol, this is the real deal. And I think Mary Wright is she writes a lot of early Chinese Republic and stuff, and she says this is the major point. After the Boxer War, this is how things happen now, and we can't really ignore that. For the other powers, this gives Russia the impetus to push into Manchuria. I think I talked about that last time, right? That's
yeah, a little bit.
So I'll just briefly. That's how they managed to keep a lot of soldiers in Manchuria and north of Korea, and this is something that antagonized Japan greatly, right? Because there was Japan and Russia both want control over the Korean Peninsula and Manchuria and China. But outside of northwestern China, the Boxer War never really happened, right? There's some concern, some fear, but in the south, like a lot of the economic situation just keeps going as it was. A lot of the governors in like the Shanghai area and all that just say, right, I know they declared war on you guys, but we're not going to hear that, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing. So outside of the Northwest, it's you don't have much destruction or terror. So that kind of keeps going. Although there were some issues with everyone dropping Marines off at Shanghai just in case, and then you have a bit of a tension between the different European powers. But as a conflict, it's pretty important. It's pretty definitive. This is the it'd be trite, but like the death knell of the Qing Empire. And after this, there's 11 short years before the major uprising and the end of dynastic control of China to this day, right?
Yeah, and I guess because you mentioned that modernization, I assume now my history around this is really fuzzy, but the Xinhai Revolution,
Mhm.
I think that at least like the actual bang kind of sets off with I think a mutiny of new army units.
Yeah, and
Um, were those established like in response to the result of the Boxer Uprising, or were they established from like a previous trend of military modernization?
so I don't know about that unit.
Hmm.
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but they did continue with this modernization of the army away from the banner system and into this the new Wu Wei Corps system, the new army model after the Boxer Uprising.
Hmm.
So I don't know that specific unit, but I know the general trend for the Chinese military was to be okay. We lost, but these are still how you fight wars now, and to try and shift everything away from that because you're not going to have banners of tigermen and archers anymore because it doesn't work.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know specifically, but I know the general trend was that way, and this is towards education, towards manufacturing. They're bringing in experts. They're starting to do at this point what the Japanese were doing in the 1850s and 60s with paying foreigner experts to come in and um, modernize. And you have they've tried this before, right? But in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where you had a fairly entrenched conservative elite that shut this down whenever they could. And when the Empress Dowager was on the side of the conservatives and shut down the 100 Days Reform in 1898, that was in ascendancy. But after the Boxer War, and when she's more open to these concepts, it's harder for that entrenched conservative elite to sway things. So the education reform, manufacturing reform, military reform starts happening in earnest. And I'm sure there are books that I haven't yet read that will say there's a direct connection between how this war turned out, how the post-war China started building itself up, and the revolution in 1911. I mean, I think it goes without saying, right? If everyone's
Yeah.
exposed to new ideas and new ways forward, they're going to start having some issues with the very unequal governing of the Qing.
Mhm. Kind of wrap things up at the end with the so what a little bit, just because
Mm,
I think at least the popular conception of the Boxer Uprising is it's almost like a novelty, like treated as a novelty. Like it's this thing that happened between the first Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, um, where I think there's obviously more significance behind the Boxer Uprising
yep.
than I think is probably given due, just because it's sandwiched between two very large events.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, not to just be me, but that's part of my thesis, right? That's why I'm focusing so much on this conflict, bookending it with the Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, is that this is a, a war where it's not just Japan beating Chinese in 1894, but you have all these European powers who are all fighting the same war, and some are doing better than others. And I think you can look at this, and I know T.G. Ott, I think, with the China question, he talks a bit about this too. So I've got someone up in established academia who's going to back me on this. That the Anglo-Japanese cooperation during the Boxer Uprising is a um, setting the stage for the Anglo-Japanese alliance, right? Because the issue always, anywhere, ever, is Russia.
Yeah.
So if you have the Japanese so um, consciously opposing Russia and siding with the British because it matches their own interests during the Boxer War and during the politics surrounding the Boxer War, and then fighting incredibly well during the Boxer War to win them battle after battle, like in Tientsin and Peking specifically, that makes this something you can't ignore when you're talking about Anglo-Japanese relations, the establishment of the alliance, and the direction of modern international relations for the first half of the 20th century.
Oh, I guess that's probably a good place to wrap up.
Aha.
Yeah, it came around. Thank you very much, Joe. This was actually it was fascinating. Because as I mentioned in the short chat, really I'm along for the ride with the audience. And I learned a whole bunch. Um,
It was a lot of fun to
and
talk about it.
yeah, I don't know if it'll happen, but if people have maybe more specific questions, we could possibly do a follow-up chat at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to answer questions. And if I got some names wrong or ranks wrong, which I'm
Hmm.
sure I have. I mean, I have my notes open here, but I'm basically off the top of my head for everything.
Well, you did a pretty good job, or at least you fooled me.
Oh, this is my thing, right? If there's one
Yeah.
thing in the world I can talk about for a long time, it's the Boxer War. But yeah, if
All
someone wants
right.
to correct me with things, I'd be happy to talk about it.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll wrap up here, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot.